Hello again. Before angry liberals start foaming at the mouth in fury and shooting off complaints to YouTube, let me say at once that I do not think that gangs of white yobbos hunting for coloured immigrants to attack was a good thing, and nor do I regard the old pastime of some skinheads of what was known as queer bashing in a favourable light. Both practices were loathsome. We are sometimes invited to feel that the country has greatly improved since those days in the late 1960s and early 1970s when such activities were rife. This was, of course, the early days of the National Front as well, and it certainly was not a good time to be either Pakistani or overtly homosexual. I suppose that what I'm wondering now is whether or not the scale and type of violence seen on the streets of our cities was better or worse in those days, though, taken overall. I think that we can all perhaps agree that any violence at all on the streets is a bad thing, and that the less of it there is, the better. Two trends in public violence are very noticeable over the last 60 years or so. The first is, of course, that the ferocity and degree of violence has increased exponentially over the course of that time. In 1964 or 1965, fighting between hooligans in public, say the mods and rockers, was limited to punching, kicking, throwing deck chairs, and perhaps scrapping with bicycle chains, balls, and knuckle dusters. There were plenty of black eyes, teeth knocked out, and bloody noses. Serious injuries inflicted during such fighting were rare, and lethal assaults all but unheard of. Much the same applied to racist attacks on immigrants and assaults on gay men. In the case of attacks on gays, the object was usually robbery, and gay men were targeted on the grounds that they would be easier to intimidate and steal from than straights. This kind of thing was known colloquially as rolling a queer. It was without doubt an odious and unpleasant crime. But again, serious injuries were rare. Once the wallet had been stolen, the gangs carrying out the robbery usually left the victim with bruises rather than anything worse. Random assaults on men of South Asian heritage were often more vicious, but even then the victims were likely to suffer only superficial injuries. This then is the first difference between street violence 50 or 60 years ago and that seen today in this country. The scale and severity was much less than that commonly seen in modern Britain. Attacks of this kind were rare, and apart from them, fights outside pubs and so on were almost invariably conducted with fists alone. The use of knives, let alone firearms, in street violence was all but unknown. The other thing we recall is that ordinary people were not involved in most of this. When rival gangs of yobbos fought, they did not involve passers-by. Unless you belonged to one of those groups of youths or were Asian or gay, none of this would really have any effect on you, let alone pose a threat to you. Today in this country, random stabbings are not at all uncommon, sometimes leading to death. Guns are used to settle trifling disputes, and sometimes passers-by are caught in the crossfire, killed by bullets, stray bullets. Victims of attacks can be now of any ethnicity or sexual orientation, and they are sometimes killed. In short, there is not only a great deal more public violence than was once the case, and it not only uncommonly ends in serious injury or even death, but it can strike any of us. It's inflicted more or less randomly on people sitting quietly on a railway train or walking their dog. It is as likely to strike white people as black, Muslims as Christians, and just as likely to be a gay person as the victim as a straight one. I will leave it to viewers to decide if this situation is an improvement on that which existed at the time that, say, the mods and rockers were and skinheads were active.